The greatest gift you and Mom could give me is signing the papers for a nursing home. My daughter-in-law said that right before she blew out the birthday candles. 20 guests stood around the table. The wine glass in my hand was still untouched. The $12,000 diamond necklace I had just given her was still shimmering under the lights. People thought she was joking. I didn't. I turned and looked at my wife. Jane was smiling, not understanding why the room had suddenly gone quiet. And in that very moment, I realized something. They didn't just want us to leave the party. They wanted us out of the house. If you're listening to this story, and you felt your heart sink just a little at that moment, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and walk with me through what happened next. And leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. But that night, as the room stayed frozen in silence after Alexandra's words, I slowly set my wine glass down and looked at my family. Alexandra set the knife down on the table and smiled as if she had just said something perfectly reasonable. No one applauded. The wind from the Monterey coast drifted in through the wide glass doors. The party was held in the main living room of the house I had worked nearly 30 years to afford. I still remember the day I signed the papers. I thought this place would be where Jane and I could grow old in peace. Alexandra adjusted her hair. Her voice softened. I'm just worried about Mom. They have nurses there, doctors, professionals. She spoke like she was presenting a business proposal. Jane sat beside me, hands resting on her lap. She still had that habit, smiling when she didn't fully follow the conversation. After her mild stroke last year, her memory sometimes lagged a few beats behind the room. But she still remembers my name. She still remembers I like tea in the evening. For me, that's enough. Maxwell stood next to his wife. He didn't look at me at first. He looked down at the oak floor, the one I chose plank by plank. Alexandra's right, Dad, he said, calmer than I expected. It's safer there. This house is too big. It's a waste. A waste. I heard that word clearly. I looked around the room. 20 guests, Alexandra's colleagues, a few investors, some friends from the yacht club. They avoided my eyes. No one wants to side with the old man at a luxury birthday party. I set my wine glass down. Not hard, just enough for the soft touch of glass against wood to be heard. Why today, I asked. Alexandra gave a small smile. Because today the whole family is here, and I thought this would be the most practical gift. A gift. I thought about the necklace I had handed her 10 minutes earlier. $12,000. Not to impress anyone. Maxwell had mentioned she liked that design. I figured, if my son was happy, I could let go of a little savings. Alexandra touched the pendant lightly. I found a wonderful place, she continued, near Palo Alto. Private room, garden. She spoke as if we had already agreed. I turned to Maxwell. Did you know about this before tonight? He stayed quiet a second too long. We just want what's best, he said. I didn't ask anything else. I didn't need more explanations. The wind moved through the room again. The white curtains swayed. That's when I noticed Alexandra's handbag on the sofa. A thin folder was sticking out. On the cover, the logo of a real estate brokerage. I recognized it immediately. It was the firm Maxwell worked for. I said nothing. Alexandra lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. This house has excellent market value, Dad. If we sell at the right time, we can rotate the capital. Maxwell could expand his business. I heard that word, and felt the distance between us more clearly than ever. You and Mom should rest, she added. There's no need to hold on to something this large when your health isn't what it used to be. Your health. I looked at Jane. She was gazing out toward the ocean, where the sunset painted the water orange. She hadn't caught every word. Maybe that was a blessing. I wondered, when did this house become too much? When did our presence become an obstacle to their plans? A guest cleared his throat to break the silence. Someone poured more wine. The party tried to continue, but the air had shifted. I stood up. I need some air, I said. No one stopped me. I stepped onto the balcony. The waves moved in steady rhythm. I chose this house for that sound. It helps me think. Behind me, the music came back on, softer than before. I heard Alexandra laugh. She mentioned something about a misunderstanding and caring. Caring. I thought about the past 10 years. The late-night calls from Maxwell. The transfers of money. Numbers Jane never fully knew. I thought about how many times I told her, everything's fine. Maybe I was wrong somewhere along the way. A moment later, Maxwell stepped outside. "Dad, don't make this a big deal," he said. "Alexandra just wants to prepare. Prepare for what I asked." He looked at the ocean instead of at me. "For the future." I nodded. I've lived long enough to know, when someone talks about the future, they're usually talking about money. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. At 75, I understand that silence can create more space than any speech ever could. "Give me a week," I said, "to arrange things." Maxwell let out a quiet breath of relief. Maybe he thought I had agreed. I walked back inside. Alexandra studied my face carefully. "1 week," I repeated. "After your birthday." She smiled. "Thank you for understanding, Dad." I nodded. But deep down, I knew something very clearly. They thought I was signing papers to move out. In truth, I was signing a different decision, and that decision would not be announced at a party. That night, after the last guest finally left, I didn't turn on the bedroom lights. Jane was already asleep. Ever since her stroke, she falls asleep faster than I do. I sat in my study, looking out at the yard that had been full of laughter just a few hours earlier. 1 week. I had asked for 1 week. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a brown leather notebook. No one in this house knew about it, not even Jane. I opened to the first page. 10 years ago, I started writing the day Maxwell called about a temporary debt. Back then, he said he only needed $30,000 to rotate a project. I believed my son. Any father would. 30 became 75. 75 became 120. Then came Alexandra's investment opportunities. Business plans that sounded smooth and polished, but always ended with, "It's just not the right timing." I turned each page. $580,000. That was the last number I recorded. 3 months ago. I never asked for it back. I never brought it up. I thought if I stayed quiet, the family would stay whole. I was wrong. Close to midnight, I heard the glass door slide open in the backyard. I turned off my desk lamp. Alexandra's voice carried through the garden. She thought everyone was asleep. "I just need to confirm," she said on the phone. 4.2 million. Condition is the house must be completely vacant before the end of next month. I didn't move. "Yes, the elderly couple will be relocated. We're handling the paperwork." A short pause. "The signature won't be a problem. She's not fully clear-minded anymore." I heard that part clearly. I didn't step outside. I didn't interrupt. I just remembered. When the door slid shut again, I finally let out a slow breath. The next morning I made tea like always. Jane asked why the house felt so quiet. "Everyone left early," I said. She nodded and didn't ask more. Maxwell came downstairs later than usual. He avoided my eyes. "Dad, I spoke too quickly last night," he began. "It's fine," I said. I slid a thin stack of papers toward him. "If we're talking about selling the house, we should be clear." He frowned. "What is this? A list of every transfer I've made to you over the past 10 years? I said nothing else. He opened it. I saw his throat move when he reached the final page. "You kept track of all this." "I'm an architect," I said. "I work with numbers." He sat down slowly. "You never said anything." "Because I didn't think families should be accounting with each other. I didn't mention the phone call. Not yet." That afternoon, Alexandra came into my study. She closed the door behind her. "Maxwell said you seemed concerned," she said gently. "I just want to understand your plan," I replied. She placed a stack of documents on my desk. Market evaluations, Monterey housing charts, projected returns. "Assets shouldn't sit idle," she said. "If we sell at the right time, we can invest in short-term rental units. Double the return in 3 years. "Assets," I repeated. "You and Mom don't need this much space anymore," she continued. "That nursing facility is excellent. Doctors who specialize in post-stroke care. I visited. I haven't agreed." She smiled lightly. "You will. It's the logical choice." Logical. I looked at her hands, perfectly manicured nails. The wedding ring Maxwell bought, with money I once transferred to him. "Who have you spoken to about selling this house?" I asked. She paused, just for a second. "Only preliminary discussions, nothing official." I nodded, as if I believed her. After she left, I opened my computer. I reviewed the property documents. Sole owner me. Maxwell's name had never been added, but Jane's had. I opened her medical file. The doctor's note read, mild cognitive decline. No loss of legal capacity. That sentence mattered more than any promise. That evening I went into the garden earlier on purpose. I wanted to be certain I hadn't imagined things. Alexandra was on the phone again. "We can close faster if needed," she said, "if we have confirmation of competency status. I can sign as representative." I stepped out of the shadows. "Representative for whom?" I asked. She jumped. Her phone nearly slipped from her hand. "Dad, I heard you last night." She was quiet for a few seconds. Then her voice turned firmer. "You need to be realistic. This house will be divided when the future happens. It's better to arrange things now. When the future happens," I repeated. "I just want everything to go smoothly." I looked straight at her. "What exactly were you planning to use my wife's signature for?" She didn't answer, and that silence said enough. "I will need to review every document you've prepared," I said slowly, "before anything is sent anywhere. Don't you trust me? I trust ink on paper." I walked back inside, leaving her standing in the garden. That night, I had no doubts left. They didn't just want us gone. They wanted control. And for the first time in many years, I realized I had been far too generous with my own kindness. 1 week, they thought it was time for me to pack. For me, it was time to review every clause I had ever signed. And then I remembered. There was one clause I had never used. I remembered it at 3 a.m, when the sound of the waves offshore kept a steady rhythm like a clock ticking. That clause was in my father's will. Maxwell's grandfather. Years ago, when I took over what remained of the family estate, the attorney explained it very clearly. If an heir commits serious harm to the rights or dignity of his parents, the owner has the right to revoke prior gifts. Back then, I laughed. I told him my family would never need a sentence like that. That night, I didn't laugh. The next morning, I drove out of Monterey before Alexandra woke up. I told Maxwell I needed to speak with an old friend about nursing home procedures. He nodded. He looked relieved. I didn't go to a nursing home. I drove to the office of Daniel Harper, a friend from college, now an estate and family asset attorney. His office is in Carmel, less than 20 minutes from my house. Daniel studied me for a long moment when I placed the brown leather notebook on his desk. "I thought you stopped keeping records years ago," he said. "So did I." He read every page, didn't speak for 15 minutes. "What's their plan?" he finally asked. "They want to sell the house and possibly sign on Jane's behalf." Daniel looked up. "Jane has not lost legal capacity." "I know," he nodded. "Then they can't do anything without your consent. Unless I keep standing still." I asked him about the gift revocation clause. Daniel pulled out the old file. He still had a copy of my father's will. The clause was still valid. "You want to activate it?" he asked. "I want to protect my wife." He thought for a moment. "If you can demonstrate that prior transfers were made under the intent of family support, and there are signs of exploitation now, you have the right to terminate and formally revoke future benefits." "I don't need repayment," I said quietly. "I just don't want them leaning on what I built anymore." Daniel understood. "Then we do 2 things," he said. "First, you remove all shared access Maxwell has to joint financial channels. Second, we draft formal documentation stating that household assets are solely yours. And the house," Daniel leaned back, "you remain sole owner. But if you're concerned about continued pressure, you can restructure the asset." I was silent for a few seconds. "How?" "There's an instrument," he said carefully. "A reverse mortgage. You're over 62. You qualify. The bank lends against the property value. No immediate repayment required, but it reduces the net equity. In other words," I said slowly, "if they try to sell later, they inherit a significant financial obligation." I nodded. I didn't see it as revenge. I saw it as a boundary. That afternoon, I returned home with a new folder in my briefcase. Alexandra was in the living room speaking to someone about progress. She stopped when she saw me. "Where did you go?" I explored options, I replied. She smiled. "So, have you made a decision?" "I'm thinking," I said. "And I want everything transparent." That night, after Maxwell went upstairs, I walked into the small gallery room at the end of the hallway. My art collection hung there, pieces I collected slowly over 30 years of work, not as investments, just because I loved them. I called a gallery in San Francisco I had worked with before. "I'd like to loan the collection for a few months," I said. Under a personal exhibition, they agreed immediately. Insurance value, nearly $1 million. 2 days later, a transport vehicle arrived. Alexandra stood at the staircase watching. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Loaning them for exhibition. Now perfect timing." She said nothing else, but her eyes changed. That same day I went to the bank. I terminated Maxwell's access to the secondary account I had opened years ago to support his household expenses. The banker asked if I was certain. "I am," I said. When I came home, Maxwell was waiting in my study. "You pulled the funds?" he asked. I reorganized. "We need operating capital. I need clarity." For the first time, he looked unsure. "Don't you trust us? I trust actions." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I spoke like a man who had already done the math. That evening I sat beside Jane on the porch. She asked why the paintings were gone. "They're traveling for a while," I said. She smiled softly. "Like we used to." I held her hand. Her skin is thinner now, but still warm. The week was almost over. Alexandra believed I was preparing to sign nursing home papers. In truth, I was signing something else. I had submitted the reverse mortgage application. The bank confirmed a preliminary valuation, $4.2 million. The same number I heard on that midnight phone call. I told no one. I simply waited. On Monday morning, I received the email. Conditional approval, pending, final signature. I printed it, placed it in an envelope. 1 week had passed. They thought I was preparing to leave this house. I was preparing to leave a different role. The role of the father, who always gave in. On Monday morning, I signed the final documents before the sun climbed too high. The bank officer came to the house. Quiet, professional. Jane sat in the next room, soft classical music playing low. She didn't ask many questions. I simply told her I was rearranging the finances. The reverse mortgage was structured as a maximum line of credit based on the home's value, which meant from the moment I signed the oceanfront villa was no longer the clean asset Alexandra believed it to be. It became a significant financial obligation. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I just felt that things were back in their proper order. 3 days later, Alexandra announced that the nursing facility vehicle would arrive Friday morning. "We should keep everything calm," she said at dinner. "No tension." I nodded. "We'll be ready," I replied. The night before they planned to move us, I barely slept. Not from worry, from preparation. I reviewed everything one last time. The paintings were gone. The antiques were secured in insured storage. The bank accounts had been restructured. I had also finalized another step, terminating every financial authorization Maxwell once had. Jane asked why the living room felt emptier. "I wanted a change of atmosphere," I told her. She looked around, then nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Friday morning was windy. The ocean wasn't loud, but it wasn't still either. Jane and I left the house at 6. No large suitcases, just 2 small bags. A private vessel waited at the Monterey harbor. I had chartered a yacht for a journey longer than I had ever allowed myself to imagine. Jane always said she wanted to see the Pacific from the middle of the water, not just from a balcony. If there was one more thing I could give her, it was this. Before we left, I placed a large envelope on the dining table. Inside were 3 items. A copy of the signed reverse mortgage agreement, the bank's notice confirming partial draw from the maximum credit line, and a detailed statement outlining the financial obligations tied to the house in the event of sale or transfer. No threats, no accusations, none were needed. At 8 in the morning, the time Alexandra had arranged the nursing home vehicle arrived. I didn't witness what followed, but I can imagine the front door opening, the living room nearly empty, no Italian sofa she once praised as perfectly modern, no walnut dining table, no artwork on the walls, just space and wind. Maxwell called at 8:15. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, Alexandra called. I didn't answer that either. We were already pulling away from the harbor when the phone vibrated again. I looked at the screen, then powered it off. Jane stood beside me on the deck, squinting at the horizon. "How long are we going?" she asked. "For a while," I said. The boat moved slowly from the dock. Monterey grew smaller behind us. Around 10, I turned the phone back on. Messages flooded in. "Where are you? What is this? What did you do to the house?" An email from Alexandra. Just one line. "You can't do this." Yes, I could. The house is still in my name, and a reverse mortgage requires no one else's consent when the legal owner stands alone. Maxwell called again. This time I answered. You turned the house into debt, his voice trembled. I exercised my right, I said calmly. We were negotiating a sale. You no longer have anything to sell without addressing the financial obligation first. Silence. Did you do this out of spite? I looked at the open water ahead. No, I did this to prevent what you were preparing behind my back. He didn't argue. I heard the call, I added. The 4.2 million. Your mother's signature. He exhaled heavily. For the first time, I heard real confusion in him. Alexandra just wanted to control. Didn't raise my voice. I simply spoke the truth. The house now carries a different value than the one you calculated. If you want to keep it, you take responsibility. If you want to leave, that is your choice. And you and Mom were on vacation. I ended the call before he could ask more. The wind strengthened as we moved farther out. Jane held my hand. I like this feeling, she said softly. It feels like starting over. I didn't answer right away. Behind us, the oceanfront villa was likely filled with arguments. Not because I wanted that, but because rushed decisions eventually meet real numbers. I didn't destroy the house. I simply changed its terms. And for the first time in many years, I no longer stood inside my own living room, feeling like a guest. The sea opened wide ahead of us. I don't know how long this journey will last, but I know one thing. We didn't leave because we were pushed out. We left because I chose the timing. 3 days after we left Monterey, I received one last call from Maxwell. There was no urgency in his voice this time. Just something heavier. The bank sent the official notice, he said. If we want to sell the house, we have to repay the entire loan first. That's correct. I didn't realize you could move that fast. I didn't realize you could prepare that fast either. Silence lingered on the line. No excuses this time. Alexandra is speaking with an attorney, he added, quieter now. That's your decision. I didn't ask how the conversations at home were going. I didn't need to. Before he hung up, he said, one more thing. I didn't see the whole picture. I set the phone down. Jane was sitting near the bow of the boat, her silver hair lifting gently in the wind. She looked at me. Is something wrong? No, I said. They're just learning how to stand on their own. She nodded, as if she understood more than I expected. In the weeks that followed, we traveled along the west coast and then farther into the Pacific. It wasn't luxury, far enough not to hear the doorbell, not to see property appraisals, not to hear the word waste. I checked my email each morning. Maxwell sent a copy of a new agreement. They had canceled the home sale. They couldn't resolve the financial obligation in the short term. Alexandra was looking for a rental near San Jose to restructure their business plan. I read it without comment. A month later, another message arrived. Dad, I'd like to see you when you're ready. No mention of the house. No mention of a nursing facility. I replied simply, take care of your family first. I didn't close the door on my son. I only closed the door on the thinking that had turned parents into assets to be liquidated. One afternoon, while we were anchored off a quiet island, Jane asked me, Are you angry with them? I thought for a long time. I'm disappointed, I said, but I'm not angry. She watched the water for a while. You've always done everything for others, she said softly. This time you did something for us. I didn't answer. Because she was right. For years, I believed a father's love meant unconditional sacrifice. I believed quiet support would keep the family steady. But kindness without boundaries is often mistaken for obligation. I don't want Maxwell to remember me as the father who ruined his plans. I want him to remember that some lines cannot be crossed. 2 months later, I received a short message. I sold the second car. I'm working extra hours. I want to fix this myself. I read that sentence more than once, not because of the money, but because for the first time, he spoke about responsibility without expectation. I replied with one line, I believe you can. I didn't send money. I didn't offer help. I allowed space to exist, not as punishment, but as breathing room. One evening, as the sunset painted the water deep red, I opened the final envelope I had brought from Monterey. Inside was a copy of the revised will Daniel and I had prepared. I created a small fund in Jane's name for families with elderly stroke patients who need rehabilitation support but lack financial resources. It isn't large, but it will make a difference somewhere. I didn't do it to prove anything to Maxwell. I did it because I want what I leave behind to reflect what I believe in, care, not control. Jane placed her hand over mine as I folded the paper. What are you thinking about? She asked. I'm thinking about the years ahead. We still have many, she said, smiling. I looked at her, the woman who has stood beside me for more than 40 years, the one who never saw me as an opportunity. In the distance, the sun touched the horizon. I thought about that birthday party, about the phrase, the greatest gift. They believed the gift was our disappearance, but the real gift was the lesson, not a lesson meant to wound, not revenge. Just this: parents may love without condition, but they still deserve respect. I never returned to Monterey. I didn't sell the house. I didn't keep it as a trophy either. I simply left it where it belongs, a shelter, not a target. That night, as the boat continued forward, Jane rested her head on my shoulder. The ocean darkened, but it wasn't frightening. I don't know what the future holds for Maxwell and Alexandra. I only know this. For the first time in many years, our future no longer depends on someone else's decisions. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. If this story made you reflect, or reminded you of someone in your own family, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share. Each subscription isn't just a number. It helps stories about dignity, boundaries, and family continue to be told. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I truly appreciate you listening.